Hi guys! Welcome to my vlog. Hello language and hello learning. Shout out to all my Kalingo, which means language. Join me in this journey of learning language and developing materials. By the way, guys, mga Kalingo, if you are first time to visit this channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you will be updated to all my upcoming videos. And if you think that this video helps you or makes you happy, give me some love and like this video to spread good vibes and positivity. So, mga Kalingo, let me ask you a question. Are you familiar of the principles and theories of language learning? If you're not familiar, this video is for you because I will gonna teach you on how the principles of language acquisition interrelated towards the development of materials. So without further ado, let's go, mga Kalingo! By the way, mga Kalingo, we have 6 principles of language acquisition, and our task is to choose a topic related to language learning and teaching. And we choose the principle of language acquisition number 1. First, the principle of language acquisition stated that a prerequisite for language acquisition is that the learners are exposed to a rich, meaningful, and comprehensible input of language in use in order to acquire the ability to use the language effectively. The learners needs a lot of experience of the language being used in a variety of different ways for a variety of purposes. Mga Kalingo, we need to be able to understand enough of this input in order to gain a language acquisition, to have a positive access to it, and it needs to be meaningful to them according to Cloyd-1 1985. We also need to experience particular language items and features many times in meaningful and comprehensible input in order to eventually acquire them. Each encounter helps to elaborate and deepen our awareness and to facilitate the development of hypotheses needed to a eventual acquisition. In relation to principles of language acquisition, to the principles of material development is that first, we must make sure that the materials contains a lot of spoken and written text which provides extensive experience of the language being used in order to achieve outcomes in a variety of text types and genres in relation to topics, themes, events, locations, and etc. likely to be meaningful to the target learners. The language materials on this specifically focuses to a textbooks because textbooks contains a lot of spoken and written text wherein it plays a vital role in the communication ability of a learners in teaching and learning process. Second, we must make sure that the language of the learners are exposed in an authentic, in the sense that it represents how language is typically used. If language is unauthentic because has been written or spoken or reduced to simplify a particular language feature, then the learners will not be able to acquire the ability to use the language typically or effectively because there is an inauthenticity. Much has been wherein the issue of authenticity, and some experts consider that it is useful to focus the attention to the feature of a language by removing distracting difficulties and complexities from sample text. We should have the contrived focus that we might be some of the values as an additional aid for the learners to have a salient features but not have a prior subsequent exposure to those features in authentic use is essential. Third, we must make sure that the language input is contextualized. Language is determined and interpreted in relation to the context of use. The contextualized example do not contain enough information about the users, the user's address, the relationship between the interactants, the setting, the intention, or even the outcome for them to be value to the language learners. We have here the example. Think at least 3 different interpretations of give him the keys, let him drive it. You can give some different interpretation based on the sentence given. But I do not know what really means, nor why the speaker has to use the imperative until I know that who is saying it, who they are, what the objective of the conversation, and only extended samples of the language contextualized use can provide learners with the information they need to develop the awareness on how the target language is actually used. Make sure, mga kalingo, that the learners are exposed to sufficient sample of language in authentic use to provide the natural recycling of language items and features which might be useful to the learners to acquire the language. We have here the example. Example of a material. They use what we call task-free activities to help to apply the principle of language acquisition number 1. It should involve the beginning of every lesson, reading of a poem or a story, or telling a joke or anecdote. This could be considered as a motivational activities prior to the lesson. This involves the beginning of every lesson. There are no questions or tasks after listening. Just like when a written copies of the text, for those students who were engaged by it, take home, read the file away. The students have to be collected many times. The students are encouraged to ask me questions about the text at any time and to return to read the text they have collected many times. We can also use extensive reading, extensive listening, extensive viewing to help to apply the principles and the use of text-driven approach, wherein we can be able to develop units of materials in which the extensive text drives the skills and the language activities to each unit. And in conclusion, mga kalingo, when we developing classroom materials, we should also have of course, consider the principles of language acquisition in teaching. Because the main teaching principles is that the teaching should meet the needs and the wants of the learners. Because the education must be a learner-centered. From this, the most important material development principle is that materials need to be written in such a way that the teacher can make use of them as a resources and not have to follow them as a script. It seems that the most classroom materials are written, though for the teachers and students to follow. It also seems that many of them are not driven or even informed by principles of language acquisition and development. Some of them manage to acquire language because their writers have been effective teachers and are intuitively applying the principles of teaching. Most of them would be a lot more effective if they were driven by a principle of acquisition. So mga kalinggo, I hope that you have learned something today about how the principles of language acquisition interrelated towards the development of materials. And if you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing. That's all for today. Continue learning the language. Let's go, mga kalinggo!